In a fertile region near the Dead Sea, stood a city known as Sodom. The city was one of the centers of civilization in its time, full of life and prosperity. The land was fertile, agricultural produce was plentiful, and trade was doing well. Yet, behind all that wealth and luxury, the Sodomites were known as a society steeped in disobedience, pride, and injustice. The inhabitants of Sodom were a stubborn and arrogant people. They live without regard for moral norms, treat strangers badly, and enjoy unlimited worldly pleasures. They like to commit heinous acts, including acts that are contrary to human nature. Not only that, they are also cruel to others and refuse to help people in need. They are very hostile to kindness. Foreigners who crossed their cities were often treated cruelly, robbed, or even made fun of. If anyone tried to cry out the truth or remind them, the Sodomites would mock and reject it arrogantly. In the midst of the depravity, Allah sent the Prophet Lutheran to warn the Sodomites. Prophet Lutheran is one of the prophets sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide mankind to the right path. He was the nephew of Prophet Ibrahim and lived at the same time. The name of the Prophet Lutheran is mentioned in several verses of the Quran, especially those related to the people to whom he preached. In Surah Al-Araf, verse 80, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the Prophet Lutheran, "And we have also sent Lutheran to her people. Remember when he said to them, why did you commit a heinous act that no one in this world had ever done before you?" Prophet Lutheran as is one of the prophets who comes from the descendants of Prophet Ibrahim as. He is the nephew of Prophet Ibrahim, the son of Ibrahim's brother named Haran. The full name of the Prophet Lutheran is Lutheran bin Haran bin Terah, which indicates that he comes from a noble lineage. In the Quran, Prophet Lutheran is often referred to as Prophet Ibrahim, because of their intertwined family ties and struggles. Under the clear sky in Haran, a small village surrounded by lush hills, a boy runs with a loose laugh. The child was named Lutheran, the son of Haran, the nephew of Ibrahim, who would later become Allah's messenger. Haran is a peaceful village, although it is surrounded by a society that is still entangled in idolatry. In a simple house made of stone and clay, the Lutheran family is known as a different family. They reject idols and worship only Allah the Almighty. Since childhood, Lutheran grew up as an intelligent and curious child. He often sat with Ibrahim, his uncle, who told stories about the wonders of heaven and earth. Ibrahim, in a soft and wise voice, taught Lutheran about Allah, the creator of all things. While her friends were busy playing or following their family's tradition of worshipping statues, Lutheran chose to sit beside Ibrahim, listening to stories that opened his heart. "Uncle," Lutheran asked one day, "why do the people in the market always carry small figurines everywhere? They looked very scared if the statue fell or broke." Ibrahim smiled, then stroked Lutheran's head. "They believe the statues can protect them, son. But the statue was just an inanimate object that couldn't do anything. Remember, only Allah is able to protect and provide sustenance." From then on, Lutheran began to realize that he was living in a blind society. However, as a child, he could not change the situation, only trying to understand the world through Ibrahim's eyes. One morning, while Lutheran was playing around the market, he saw a group of people carrying a large statue. They cheered, singing hymns to the idol. Lutheran looked at in confusion. In the middle of the crowd, he saw an old man in a hurry, carrying firewood to offer to the statue. Lutheran couldn't help but be curious. "Sir, why did you bring firewood for the statue?" asked Lutheran innocently. The old man turned his head and smiled. "This statue is our God, son. He will bless our harvest if we give him an offering." Lutheran frowned. "But, How could an object that couldn't move give a blessing? Isn't it only Allah who created the rain and fertile soil? The crowd began to pay attention to the conversation. Some laughed mockingly, while others whispered. The old man snorted angrily. A little kid like you doesn't know anything. Go and don't talk nonsense. Lutheran retreated, but her heart remained steadfast. He knew that what Abraham was teaching was the truth, even though most people in Haran did not understand it. One night, Ibrahim asked Lutheran out of the house. They walked towards a high hill, where the sky looked very clear. The stars shone brightly, as if they were speaking to them. Lutheran, Ibrahim began, pay attention to this sky. Who do you think created all this? Lutheran looked at him in amazement. He shook his head, not knowing what to answer. Allah is the one who created all this, continued Ibrahim. The stars, the moon, the sun, all submit to him. He is almighty over all things. That night, Lutheran felt a peace she had never felt before. He began to understand that his life had a greater purpose. Allah had planted a seed of faith in his heart, which would one day grow into a sturdy tree. When Lutheran was a teenager, Ibrahim received Allah's order to leave Haran and move to another country. Ibrahim took Sarah, his wife, and Lutheran, the most faithful niece. Their journey was challenging, passing through hot deserts and steep valleys. However, Lutheran never complained. He believed that Allah was always with them. Along the way, Ibrahim continued to teach Lutheran about the oneness of Allah and the duty of a servant to call man to the truth. Lutheran, Ibrahim said one day, Allah has chosen us to bring light in the midst of darkness. This task is not easy, but believe me, Allah is always with his obedient servant. Those words were imprinted on Lutheran's heart. He grew up to be a young man full of courage and steadfastness in faith. Until one day, Allah chose him as a prophet for the Sodomites, a society drowning in sin. The Sodomites even did a very dirty act that had never been done by the inhabitants of the earth before, namely liking each other of the same sex. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hated this act and forbade his people to like the same sex. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in his words in the Quran Surah Al-Anbiya verses 74 to 75 that all the inhabitants of the land of Sodom committed heinous deeds, except for those who lived in the house of the Prophet Lutheran. To Lutheran, we have given him wisdom and knowledge, and we have saved him from the city that has done heinous deeds. Indeed, they are the wicked and wicked people. We put it into our grace. Indeed, he belongs to the class of the righteous. QS Al-Anbiya, 74 to 75. Many immigrants in Sodom city are often victims of their bad deeds. Those who dare to resist, will not hesitate to be killed. If the person who becomes an immigrant is a handsome man, then he will be snatched up by the male population, and vice versa for women. The Prophet Lutheran patiently guided them to realize what he was doing, but no one would listen. Even the Sodomites threatened and committed evil against the Prophet Ruth to the point of intending to expel the Prophet Ruth from the city. This is as narrated in the Quran Surah Ash-Shu'ara verses 160 to 167, the Luts have denied the messengers. When their brother Lutheran said to them, "Why don't you be righteous indeed? I am a trusted apostle sent to you. So, fear Allah and obey me. I do not ask you for anything in return. My reward is none other than from the Lord of hosts. Why do you come to the male type among humans homosexual in the meantime? You leave the women that God created to be your wives. You are a people who go beyond the limits." They replied, "O Lutheran, if you do not stop, you will indeed be among the people who have been thrown out." Ash-Shu'ara, 160 to 167. The Prophet Lutheran as then prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that his people would be punished for their bad deeds. Finally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent an angel as a guest disguised in the form of handsome young men. This made the Sodomites flock to the house of the Prophet Lutheran. The Sodomites asked the Prophet Luther to hand over the handsome young men to them. Then the angels revealed who they really were and announced that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would soon send down the punishment at dawn. Prophet Lutheran and his followers were asked to leave the city at night. As they walked away from the city, they must not look back so as not to see the torment that was about to occur. The story of the angel's arrival to the Prophet Lutheran is described in the Quran Surah Hud verses 77 to 81. When our messenger's angels came to Lutheran, he felt uneasy and his chest felt cramped because of their arrival. Lutheran said, "It's a very difficult day." His people rushed to meet him. Since ancient times, they have always committed heinous acts. Lutheran said, "O my people, these are my daughters. They are more holy to you. Therefore, fear Allah and do not defile my name before this guest of mine." "Are there no sensible people among you?" they replied. "Indeed, you must know that we have no desire for your daughters and you certainly know what we want." He Lutheran said, "If I have the strength to block you or I can take refuge in a strong relative, I certainly do." They said, "O Lut, we are indeed the messengers of your Lord. They will not be able to disturb you because they will be destroyed. Therefore, go with your family in the early hours of the night and let no one among you look back, except your wife. Indeed, he will be subjected to the torment that befalls them, and indeed when destruction occurs at dawn. Isn't dawn near? QS Hud 77 to 81. The story of Allah's punishment to the Sodomites. When dawn came, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a very powerful punishment in the form of landslides and hailstones in the land of Sodom. A great rock fell on the Sodomites one after another until they perished. The story of the punishment being handed down to the Sodomites is mentioned in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Qamar verses 33 to 39, "Even the Luts have denied the threats of their prophet. Indeed, we have sent forth upon them the wind that brought the stones, except for the house of Lutheran. We saved it before dawn, as a blessing from us. Thus we repay those who are grateful. And indeed, he Lutheran warned them of our punishments. So, they deny the threats. And indeed they persuaded him to surrender his guests, and we blinded their eyes. And, indeed, the next day, they were struck by eternal punishment. Therefore, feel my punishment and my threats." QS Al-Qamar 33 to 39. The story of the Sodomites is a stark warning to mankind. Blatant disobedience and arrogance in rejecting the truth are the path to destruction. Allah is most merciful, but also most just. He gives time for his servants to repent, but if they continue to disobey, then punishment will come in return for their tyranny. As believers, we are taught to always maintain morals, obey Allah's orders, and stay away from all forms of disobedience. This story is a reminder for us that life in the world is only temporary, and true happiness can only be achieved by carrying out Allah's commands and staying away from his prohibitions.